In 1969, Elvis walked into a Memphis antique shop and saw something impossible. His first songbook from 1954, the one he thought he'd lost forever. But when he tried to buy it, the elderly owner refused. "This notebook saved my life," she said. Then she told him a story that changed how Elvis understood his purpose. It was a rainy afternoon in October 1969, and Elvis was driving through Memphis with nothing particular to do. His movie career was winding down. His Vegas residency hadn't started yet. He was in a strange in-between period, feeling disconnected from the music that had once meant everything to him. On impulse, Elvis pulled over at a small antique shop he'd never noticed before. The sign said, "Henderson's Antiques, 50 years in business." Something about it called to him, maybe nostalgia, maybe just curiosity. Inside, the shop was crowded with memories. Old furniture, vintage clothing, dusty books, forgotten treasures from other people's lives. Elvis browsed casually, not looking for anything in particular. Then he saw it. On a shelf near the back, partially hidden behind a stack of old records, was a worn spiral notebook. The cover was faded red, water-stained in places, but Elvis recognized it instantly. His hands started shaking as he reached for it. He opened the notebook and saw his own handwriting, young, uncertain, practicing song lyrics and chord progressions. This was the songbook he'd kept in 1954 when he was just starting out at Sun Records. The notebook where he'd written his first attempts at songwriting, where he'd practiced songs until he knew them perfectly. He'd lost this notebook in 1955. He'd assumed it had been thrown away or destroyed. But here it was, 15 years later, in an antique shop in Memphis. Elvis felt tears in his eyes. This notebook represented a time when he was hungry and hopeful, when music was still pure and uncomplicated by fame. An elderly woman approached from behind the counter. She was probably in her 70s, with kind eyes and silver hair pulled back in a bun. "Can I help you with something?" she asked. Elvis held up the notebook. This is mine. I mean, it was mine. I lost it 15 years ago. I can't believe it's here. How much is it?" The woman looked at the notebook, then at Elvis. Her eyes widened with recognition. "You're Elvis Presley." "Yes, ma'am. And this notebook? It's from when I was first starting out. I'd really like to buy it back." The woman's expression shifted. She reached out and gently took the notebook from Elvis's hands, holding it as if it were made of glass. "This notebook," she said quietly, "saved my life. I'm sorry, Mr. Presley, but it's not for sale." Elvis stared at her confused. "I don't understand. How could my old notebook save your life?" The woman gestured to 2 chairs near the back of the shop. "Would you sit with me for a moment? I'd like to tell you a story, if you have time." Elvis sat down, unable to take his eyes off the notebook in the woman's hands. "My name is Eleanor Henderson," the woman began. "This shop belonged to my husband, Robert. We ran it together for 47 years. But in 1955, Robert died suddenly. Heart attack. He was only 52. She paused, lost in the memory. "We never had children. This shop was our whole life. When Robert died, I didn't know how to go on. The grief was crushing. I'd wake up every morning and not know why I should get out of bed." Elvis listened, seeing his own mother's death reflected in Eleanor's pain. "One day in August, 1955, Eleanor continued, I was going through Robert's things, trying to organize the shop. I found this notebook mixed in with some items he'd bought at an estate sale. I opened it and saw song lyrics, musical notes, someone's dreams written in young handwriting. I started reading the songs. They were hopeful, energetic, full of life. And I thought, whoever wrote these songs had dreams, had purpose, had something they wanted to say to the world." Eleanor looked at Elvis. "That day I was planning to close the shop forever. I was planning to end my life, Mr. Presley. I couldn't see a reason to continue without Robert. But those songs in this notebook reminded me that life has purpose, that creativity matters, that hope exists." Elvis felt his throat tighten. "I kept this notebook," Eleanor said. "I'd read it when the grief got too heavy. Those songs, your songs, they became my lifeline. They reminded me that somewhere a young person was dreaming and working and believing in something. And if that person could have hope, maybe I could too. She smiled, tears in her eyes. I didn't even know who wrote it until years later when I heard your name on the radio and recognized it from the cover. E. Presley, Songs. By then, you were famous. But to me, you were the young dreamer whose notebook had saved my life. Elvis couldn't speak. He'd spent 15 years becoming Elvis Presley the star, but he'd never imagined his early scribblings could have this kind of impact. I've kept this notebook for 14 years, Eleanor said. It's been with me through every hard day, every moment when I wanted to give up. I'd open it and read your songs and remember that life has meaning, that creativity is sacred, that hope is real. Elvis sat in silence for a long moment. Then he said quietly, Mrs. Henderson, I thought I'd lost this notebook because I was careless. I thought it was gone forever, and that was my punishment for not taking better care of it. But hearing your story, maybe it was meant to find you. Maybe it needed to save your life more than I needed to keep it. Eleanor shook her head. But these are your songs, Mr. Presley, your dreams, your work. No, Elvis said firmly. They were my dreams, but they became your lifeline. That makes them as much yours as mine. Maybe more yours because you needed them in a way I never did. He looked at the notebook in Eleanor's hands. I came in here thinking I'd found something I'd lost. But really, I found something more important, proof that music matters in ways I never imagined, that what we create goes out into the world and touches people we'll never meet, in ways we'll never know. Eleanor was crying now. Your music has meant so much to so many people. But this notebook? It's personal. It's raw. It's you before you were Elvis. That's what saved me, the humanity in these pages. Elvis reached over and gently pushed the notebook back toward Eleanor. Then you should keep it. It was doing more good with you than it ever did with me. But Mr. Presley, please, Elvis said, call me Elvis, and please keep the notebook. Knowing it saved your life means more to me than having it back ever could. Eleanor held the notebook close to her chest. Then, after a long pause, she made a decision. Elvis, she said slowly, this notebook saved my life in 1955, but I don't need it to save me anymore. I've survived. I've built a life. I kept this shop going for 14 years after Robert died. I found meaning again. The notebook did its job. She held it out to him. I think it's time for this to go back to you. Not because you need it, but because you need to know what it did. You need to carry this story with you. You need to remember that everything you create matters, even the things you think are lost or forgotten. Elvis took the notebook with trembling hands. Are you sure? I'm sure, but I want you to promise me something. Anything. Remember this story. Remember that your music, even your earliest, rawest attempts, had the power to save a life. When you're feeling lost or disconnected from your art, remember that somewhere, someone needs what you create, even if you never know who or how. Elvis nodded, unable to speak. Tears were rolling down his face. Eleanor stood up and walked to the shop counter. She returned with a pen and piece of paper. Would you sign something for me? Not as Elvis Presley the star, just as the young person who wrote these songs and unknowingly saved an old woman's life. Elvis wrote, "To Eleanor, you saved these songs by letting them save you. Thank you for teaching me what music is really for. With love and gratitude." Elvis left Henderson's Antiques that day carrying the notebook he thought he'd never see again. But more importantly, carrying a story that would change how he approached music for the rest of his life. He sat in his car for a long time, reading through the old songs. They were rough, unpolished, the work of a teenager with dreams bigger than his talent. But they'd saved a life. These imperfect amateur songs had given a grieving widow a reason to keep living. Elvis thought about all the music he'd made since then, the hits, the albums, the movies. He'd always focused on the big moments, the #1 records, the sold-out concerts, the awards. But maybe the real impact was smaller, more personal, more invisible. Maybe somewhere someone had heard "Love Me Tender" on the night they decided not to give up. Maybe someone had danced to Jailhouse Rock and felt joy for the first time in months. Maybe someone had sung along to "Can't Help Falling in Love" and believed in romance again. He'd never know. That was the point. Art goes out into the world and does its work quietly, privately, in ways the artist never sees. That evening, Elvis called his longtime friend and spiritual advisor, Larry Geller. "I need to tell you something that happened today." Elvis told him the whole story, the antique shop, the notebook, Eleanor Henderson, the 14 years she'd kept it as a lifeline. "That's profound," Larry said. "You've influenced millions of people with your music. But this is different. This is direct, immediate proof that what you create matters on the most fundamental level, life and death." "I keep thinking," Elvis said, "about all the things I've created that I thought were failures or weren't good enough or got lost or forgotten. What if they all mattered to someone, somewhere? What if nothing we create is actually wasted?" "That's exactly right," Larry said. "Every act of creation sends ripples out into the world. You can't control where they go or who they touch. You just have to trust that they matter." Elvis kept that notebook for the rest of his life. He'd take it out sometimes when he was feeling disconnected from music, when the Vegas shows felt empty, when the pills made him forget why he'd started singing in the first place. He'd open it and remember. A woman named Eleanor Henderson had needed these imperfect songs more than he'd needed to keep them, and that made every note he'd ever written worthwhile. Eleanor Henderson lived until 1994. She kept Henderson's Antiques running until she was 92 years old. When she finally closed the shop, she gave several interviews about her encounter with Elvis. "People ask me what it was like to meet Elvis Presley," she'd say, "but what mattered wasn't meeting a celebrity. It was the moment when a famous person understood that his art had saved an unknown person's life. The gratitude in his eyes, that's what I remember. Not the fame, the humanity." She continued, "Elvis could have demanded I give him that notebook. He could have offered me money. But instead, he told me to keep it, because it had done more good with me. That tells you everything you need to know about who he really was." After Eleanor died, her family found dozens of letters between her and Elvis. He had written to her several times over the years, checking on her, sharing his struggles, asking her advice. She'd become, in a way, his spiritual anchor, the person who reminded him why his music mattered. In one letter from 1975, Elvis wrote, "Eleanor, I'm going through a hard time. The performances feel empty. I feel like a wind-up toy doing the same show night after night. But then I remember your story about the notebook. I remember that somewhere, someone might need these songs the way you needed them in 1955. And that gets me back on stage. Thank you for that gift." The notebook itself was found after Elvis's death in August 1977. It was in his bedside drawer at Graceland, along with Eleanor's letters and the note he'd written to her that day in 1969. Lisa Marie Presley donated the notebook to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2005, along with documentation of Eleanor's story. It's now displayed with a plaque that reads, "Elvis Presley's first songbook, 1954 lost in 1955. Found by Eleanor Henderson, who kept it for 14 years as a lifeline during grief. Returned to Elvis in 1969. This notebook represents the invisible power of art to save lives." The story has resonated deeply with artists and creators of all kinds. It's become a touchstone for discussions about why we create, who we create for, and the unknowable impact of our work. "The Eleanor Henderson story teaches us something crucial," said songwriter Paul Simon. "We create and then we let go. Our art goes out into the world and does its work without us. We'll never know all the ways it matters. We just have to trust that it does." Musicians facing creative blocks or questioning their purpose often cite the story. "When I'm struggling," said singer-songwriter Brandi Carlile, "I think about that notebook, about how Elvis's rough early attempts at songwriting saved a life. It reminds me that I don't have to be perfect. I just have to be honest. And somewhere, somehow, that will matter to someone. The story has also influenced grief counseling and suicide prevention work. Therapists sometimes share it with clients who feel their lives have no purpose or impact. The Notebook story is powerful, said grief counselor Dr. Sarah Mitchell, because it shows that we never know how we're affecting others. Eleanor didn't know her continued survival would one day give Elvis a sense of purpose. Elvis didn't know his youthful songs would save a life. We're all connected in ways we can't see. Our existence matters in ways we can't measure. Today, when people visit the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and see that faded red notebook in its display case, they often pause for a long time. They read Eleanor's story on the plaque, and many of them cry. Because the notebook isn't just about Elvis. It's about everyone who's ever created something and wondered if it mattered. Everyone who's ever felt lost and found meaning in someone else's art. Everyone who's ever needed to be reminded that their life has purpose and impact, even when they can't see it. Elvis Presley wrote those songs in 1954 as a 19-year-old truck driver with dreams. He thought he'd lost the notebook in 1955 and never knew what happened to it. In 1969, he found it in an antique shop and learned it had saved a life. The young dreamer who wrote those songs couldn't have imagined their journey. From his hands to a stranger's lifeline, to a famous man's reminder of purpose. 15 years of invisible impact that changed two lives in different ways. That's what art does. It travels. It transforms. It saves. Not always in ways we can see or measure, but always, always it matters. Eleanor kept the songs alive when she needed them. Elvis carried the story when he needed it. And now, decades later, millions of people know about the faded red notebook and remember. What we create goes further than we can imagine. Who we touch, we may never know. But the touching happens regardless. Elvis's songbook from 1954 saved Eleanor Henderson's life in 1955. And Eleanor Henderson's story saved Elvis's sense of purpose in 1969. Two strangers, connected by a notebook, teaching each other that art and life and hope are all bound together in ways we rarely get to see. But sometimes, just sometimes, we get a glimpse. We walk into an antique shop on a rainy afternoon and find proof that what we created mattered more than we ever knew. And that makes all the creating, all the struggling, all the doubt, all the hard work worthwhile. Because somewhere, someone needs exactly what we have to give. Even if we never meet them, even if we never know their name, the art finds its way. The notebook saves the life. The story reminds us all that we matter more than we know. If this story of art's invisible journey and the lives it saves moved you, subscribe and share it. Have you ever been saved by someone's art? Let us know in the comments.